What's going on, people, and welcome back to the channel. So I'm going to do a generalised video today. I'm going to be calm because being angry doesn't make me look good, and it mentally gets to me as well. We're all angry today, but yeah, I'm going to do a reaction to the transfer window for this summer and just give you my thoughts. So Celtic did bring in some players. They brought in Ross Doolan, Kieran Tierney, Inamura, Tanuki, who they brought in last night from Hollerby. They brought in Shinyamada. They brought in Callum Osmond. I can't remember who else they brought. Michel Ange Balaguisha as well. Benjamin Nygren. So they did bring in some players. But overall, this transfer window has been the worst in my lifetime. It really has. It's absolutely shocking from Celtic. They just don't care. They really don't. They're deliberately going out of their way to make things miserable for us fans all the time. They really are. It's the people at the top of the club predominantly to blame. Brendan Rodgers as well. I remember a few weeks ago he did come out and say there is some people at Celtic who don't like him. I know exactly who he's talking about. Peter Lawwell. Peter Lawwell doesn't like Brendan Rodgers. Brendan Rodgers doesn't like Peter Lawwell. It's so obvious. Peter Lawwell was a massive part of the reason Brendan walked away the first time by not backing him. Absolutely ridiculous. It really is. You know, Paul Tisdale is a major problem with this as well. Brought in as the head of operations. Absolutely terrible since he's come in. You know, absolutely dreadful appointment. Never come out and spoke to the fans. Just like all of them do upstairs. You know, they're absolutely ridiculous, all of them. They need to go today. People I've seen online, people have said they're cancelling the Europa League package when it comes through. They're not going. I don't blame them. That's the only way to hit these people, unfortunately, is by not going to the Europa League matches. Some people are not going to the cup games. They said, I don't want to be part of this anymore in this home cup scheme. They've said no. They've cancelled it. They wanted to be taken off the register. It's absolutely ridiculous. The only problem is we've got so many people on the waiting list. This is a problem. So there'll be certain people who've got kids and stuff who still want to go to the game. I've got nothing against those people. It's their choice, you know, at the end of the day. But we really need people to pull together to get rid of this board because they're ruining Celtic every single season. You've had ex-players coming out and criticising them. You've had, you know, managers. Brendan's basically been criticising them in his press conferences. You've had Chris Sutton saying things, you know. Benjamin Seagrass come out and said how unbelievably stupid Celtic actually are in terms of responding to things. Yang, yesterday, the whole situation with Yang. Yang went down to Birmingham. And we brought him back. Birmingham agreed to fee. He done a medical and everything. He was going to join Birmingham. Didn't happen because Celtic couldn't be bothered to get a player in. Absolutely ridiculous. They were scrambling around. You know, I've had weeks and weeks and weeks to get replacements in. They haven't done it. Absolutely terrible. Not how you run a football club at all. Michael Nicholson didn't even answer the phone from Birmingham. Absolutely horrendous. What was he doing? Absolutely nothing. You know, the guy does nothing for us. You know, he's a lazy sod. You know, he does nothing. All these people do absolutely bugger all for us. All these board members, what are they actually doing at Celtic? Doing nothing. Low balling teams. Kasper Dolberg, we could have got him 6 weeks ago, and he's now gone to Ajax because Celtic waited until the last minute on the last day to try and agree a deal with Anderlecht, and then Ajax came in at the last minute. Of course he's going to go to Ajax. Ajax could offer him Champions League football. We could have offered him that if we actually bothered to get the players in to get into the Champions League, which they cost us, to be honest. If Brendan walked tomorrow, I wouldn't blame him. You know, Brendan, I think, won't see the season out. I think we're a serious... Well, I honestly don't think we'll win the league. I think we'll lose now. 100% the league's gone, in my opinion. People are going to say, don't get ahead of yourself. Rangers are not that great. They don't have to be because we're not great either. We're absolutely terrible. We're not going to win anything this season. We're going to go out of the Europa League with no points, in my opinion. We're not going to win any games in the Europa League. I don't care about the Europa League, to be honest. You know, I'm happy fans are boycotting it and not going. Why should they go when these people are not listening to us? You know, they have no ambition for us whatsoever. It has to be the rest of the season, us against the board. Yeah, it'll affect the team on the pitch, but unfortunately, that's just the way things are going. You know, it's affecting the team anyway. You can see in the performances, the frustrations getting to the pitch. And to the players, you know, even our senior players like McGregor, Carter Vickers, Hatate, Maeda, they're struggling. They're struggling if they've got no other quality around them. You know, fresh blood, you know, fresh quality brings positivity. You know, this is what the Celtic board don't realise. You know, they seem to think that, you know, not sticking with the same thing all the time is going to keep galvanising success. It won't, you know, domestically. You know, it really is terrible. You know, Dermot Desmond, massive problem. A huge problem with this. You know, majority shareholder, but he thinks he owns the club. You know, he owns 35% of the football club. It's ridiculous. The guy's got too much power. You know, I mean, the AGM, we can't wait for the AGM, to be honest. I mean, the AGM's in November, I believe, before Christmas. You know, surely to God, you know, shareholders cannot be happy with the product on the pitch. Surely not, and failing for the Champions League again, you know. We failed for the Champions League so many times because of their incompetence. It's just not just this season. This has been going on for years and years and years. You know, fans are so sick of it, you know. I'm not going to watch any of the games. You know, I listen to them on the radio and watch the highlights and give match reviews, but I'm not watching them. I can't be bothered with it. You know, it does my head in. I don't like these people at the top of the club. They're so lazy. They're selfish people who are not Celtic fans, even though they claim to be. Brendan came out the other day for some reason and said that they bleed Celtic. They bleed money. They bleed bonuses. They bleed opening hotels, you know, with fans' money by not, instead of investing in a good squad. You know, it's ridiculous. And yeah, I'm not surprised. I knew we weren't going to do anything yesterday. You know, yeah, we got Taniki in from Hollaby, but even that, it took us 3 bids to get him in. Absolutely outrageous, you know, terrible. Absolutely terrible. Not the way you run a football club. Deflated, disappointed, annoyed. People saying, oh, they didn't give him any money because he's leaving at the end of the season. It's not the point. You still back the manager. The manager probably hasn't even signed a new contract because you said you weren't going to back him anyway. That's probably the truth. The board would spin it and say it wasn't their fault. It's not true. It is their fault. They're to blame for everything, in my opinion. You know, they have put this season into doubt. You know, fans are more worried about what's going on upstairs than what's on the pitch, you know, because the board make it about them. It's always about them. When we're in a position of strength, we don't push on. We've got players criticising us, you know, Go Ahead Eagles laughing at us, you know, other teams, and they don't even treat their own fans with, not only do they treat their own fans with disrespect, they also treat other teams with disrespect by offering these crappy bids, low-balling teams. Go Ahead Eagles, for example, you know, for Brigham, we should have paid $5 million if we wanted Brigham. We didn't. You know, we offered 2.5, ridiculous. We've got money. We have got the money. It's ridiculous. It's so selfish. It's incompetence at the highest level. I honestly think that they want Rangers to win the league. I honestly think they want to make it interesting in Scottish football. This is just ridiculous. We should be winning the league every single season. But we should be getting into the Champions League all the time, mostly, you know. If this happened every now and then, you'd be disappointed, but it happens every single time with this board. We go up against a team we should be beating in the Champions League, who are better than, or we should be better than, and we lose because we just haven't. Our board are incompetent. We haven't got the players in time. We haven't got the players who are at the standard, and they need to go. They need to go now. You know, there's no point fans waiting until the next home game in 4 weeks' time. You know, fans need to get to Celtic Park today. Celtic fans should have been outside the ground last night protesting at 8. They should have been protesting as soon as yesterday began, you know, against these people. There should be thousands and thousands of Celtic fans protesting against this. This is just nonsense. It really is. They're clearly not interested in taking us forward, so why should we keep them in charge? They're so lazy. We're the only ones who can get rid of them. Nobody else can. We're the only people who can do it. You know, yeah, we've got fans who will always back the team and will keep going to the games, but I honestly don't think that now people are starting to turn. A lot of people have turned. There's way more people on board now with this than there was before yesterday. I think people are beginning to realise now these people just don't care. And they're holding the club back, which they are. They're deliberately sabotaging us in everything we do. Our ambition for this football club, you know, we want to be successful domestically, but we also want to have a go in Europe. You know, they don't want that. They just want to keep us on a level playing field with Rangers, or just be just ahead of Rangers. It's ridiculous, you know. Rangers will fancy the league now. You know, Rangers are no great shakes, but at least Rangers brought players in, you know, we don't know what they're like, you know. Gassama looks like a decent player for them, to be honest. You know, look what he did to Tierney the other day. Absolutely terrible from Tierney. You know, we got problems with fitness. Tierney can't last 60 minutes, last a game. Ridiculous. You know, that was the issue of bringing Kieran Tierney back, was his fitness. Yeah, we brought Scarachi in from Boca Juniors on loan, but why is it a loan? Why have we not bought the guy outright? It's ridiculous. No right backs, you know, Ralston and Donovan, you know, not positive at all in the right back area, to be honest. Centre-backs, you've got Liam Scales, who we don't think is good enough, but yet he's been our best player this season defensively. You've got Carter Vickers, who doesn't look interested anymore. You've got Trusty, who actually done quite well in pre-season, but he's injured. Again, Trusty... But then again, Trusty's been dodgy since he signed in domestic games. He's not been great domestically. Europe, against Atlanta, he's outstanding. And he played really well in pre-season as well. But he's injured. You've got Dane Murray, who's young. Dane Murray, for me, looks like he could be a good prospect. But he has done well. But it's not fair to rely on Dane Murray. What happens if he plays against like Dundee United or something and he makes a mistake? Everyone's going to be on his back. It's just not fair on Dane Murray, to be honest. He should be coming on as a sub. He shouldn't be starting games, which he might have to. You've got Jamal Simpson-Pewsley, nowhere to be seen. Signed him for Manchester City on loan with no option to buy. Completely pointless signing. Hasn't played a single minute because he's not our player. Why are we developing other teams' players? Again, it's just laziness from the club. It really is. Brendan clearly doesn't want this guy, so why is he here? I wouldn't be surprised if he turns around and said, I want to go back to Manchester City. I'm not playing, so what's the point? Complete waste of time signing. You've got, in midfield, you've got McGregor, you've got Hatate, Negron, Engels, Bernardo. Bernardo doesn't even get any minutes. It's ridiculous. Bernardo needs to get more time, I think. Negron flatters to deceive. He's very arrogant, in my opinion. Negron, yeah, he has scored some goals, but the last 3 games, he's been horrendous. He's one of the worst players on the pitch. He's not a winger. That Old Firm game, he was absolutely tragic to watch. He's not a winger, but he hasn't... Negron is up and down. It's still early with Negron. Give him a bit of time, but he has scored goals, but he's flattered to deceive so far. You've got, Hatate doesn't look interested. McGregor looks old. McGregor has to play all the time, which is ridiculous because we don't need him all the time. We didn't need him on Sunday, in my opinion. We played against Livingston last week, and yeah, he came on and helped us win the game in the second half against Livingston, but, or 2 weeks ago, sorry, but still, it's still not a point. McGregor doesn't need to start all the time. And then up front, we've got no strikers of the required quality apart from Dyson, but Dyson's not a striker outright. It's ridiculous. Osman's never going to play for Celtic. Complete pointless signing from Fulham. Quite clearly, Brendan Rodgers doesn't think he's good enough, so why is he here? Yamada, I don't know about Yamada. He done all right the other day, but again, remains to be seen. Ida's gone. I thought we weren't going to sell Ida. Rodgers came out on Friday and said we won't sell Ida unless we get a replacement. Did we get a replacement? No, we did not. It's ridiculous. We're mucking about with Iheanacho, who's just been released by Sevilla, Spain. We wanted to go for him in January. He said no. Why are we going for a guy who doesn't want to play for us? Ridiculous, And Iheanacho's not even a good striker. Look at his record since he left Man City. It's been dreadful. And he's free as well. The board will get away with that and say, look, we got a striker in. But you paid nothing for him because you didn't want to get in strikers. You didn't want to get in any players whatsoever. You're so lazy. Please go. Dermot Desmond, do us all a favour and go. You don't care about us. Sell your shares. What use have you got for us, if you're never going to take us forward? Take Lorwell, Nicholson, Brown, Mackay and the rest of them with you because these people are just lazy. Will they release a statement? Will they? No, they bloody well will not, They're just so lazy, The fans need to do something about this. It's just ridiculous. But yeah, overall, just a terrible, terrible transfer window. No words to describe how bad it's been, but I'm not surprised. This has been bubbling away for years, not just under Brendan, under loads of managers, Strachan. Even as far back as O'Neill towards the end, there was problems starting to rear their ugly head, It's been covered up by domestic success, but, it's always been rumbling in the background. The board, causing problems, They're so amateurish, They're just not... They're business people running Celtic as a clothing brand, not as a football club. That's the problem. It's ridiculous. We're not a clothing brand, we're a football club. They're so lazy. And they need to go. I've said it so many times. They need to go. Fans need to pull together. The boys, the Green Brigade, the Celtic Trust. There's so many people who just need to pull together. Celtic Trust are having an AGM tonight to complain against the people who run the club. I was looking at an interview yesterday from Peter Lorwell from 2011. 2011, we had gone out of the Champions League. And Peter Lawwell says that the board want what's best for Celtic. They do invest money. You know, it's a load of rubbish. It really is. It's a load of rubbish. They invest money for themselves. They're so lazy. Selfish people who need to get their arse out of the football club. You know, we are the only ones who can do it. You know, if that means sabotaging the season, so be it. You know, if we have to lose the league, so be it. I'd be more happy with us getting rid of them than us and losing the league, than keeping them in and us winning the league, to be honest, because we don't need them. You know, they seem to think that they know better than us. They know absolutely nothing about football, in my opinion. They're so lazy. Or you could argue they know a lot about business, but then we're not a business firsthand. You know, we're a football club. They need to go. It's going to be hard because, like I said, we're still going to have fans with kids going into the ground and stuff. It's hard to criticise those people because, you know, what are you going to do? Stop people from walking in with their kids into the ground? Of course you're not going to do that, you know, but, you know, even not protesting outside, you know, not going emptying the stands for every single home game. Something like that, you know, draconian measures against these people, you know, it's just outrageous. But, yeah, that's my reaction to it. I'll be back with a reaction to the Kilmarnock game. I'm like I said, I'm not going to watch any games. I'm really not, because it does my head in. I'll watch the highlights and see how it goes, but I just can't be bothered with it, you know, to be honest. And yeah, thanks for watching this video. Take care. I'll be back with a reaction to the Kilmarnock game after the international break. Peace.